if you've ever been in the military and you finished the duty day, and instead of going home, you just sat around for about an hour or two just doing nothing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, like, comment, all that stuff helps me out quite a bit. Guys, our big supporter right now is Gun Mag Warehouse. They support the channel quite a bit. Go in there, get some magazines from them. They sell them at great prices, and as always, thank them for being awesome. Guys, if you're looking to support the channel in other ways, we of course have Vertex. You can get some sweet plaid that is specifically designed for concealed carry. It's pretty cool. Discount code GRANTHUMB gets you 25% off. And of course, LEX ammunition. Get ammunition, get training. That's what matters. Discount code is GRANTHUMB. Guys, I appreciate everything that you do for me. I reflected the other day on kind of how far we've come on the channel. It's all due to you guys watching it and supporting me. So I want to thank you guys on a kind of serious note for all the support. Again, I wouldn't be here without you. So you guys rock, and I appreciate everything you guys do for me. Some small way, I love you. Just kidding. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about a pretty legendary pistol, and likely one that you recognized. We're going to be talking about the Browning High Power. If you aren't familiar with the Browning High Power, you really should be. The Browning High Power is probably one of the most widely used military pistols in all of history, alongside several others. The Browning High Power has been used by over 50 countries in their militaries, as well as law enforcement agencies, especially in the U.S. It's been used by special operations. It's been used by good and bad. I feel like I'm about to go into a History Channel Tales of the Gun thing. Great show, by the way. So sad it's gone. But there is so much to be said about the Browning High Power, and I'm not here to debate whether or not it's a great pistol, because it is. The Browning High Power in many ways revolutionized pistol design. And I'm not forgotten weapons. I'm not going to get into the history of the gun. I'm going to talk about my normal pros and cons and shootability and that type of thing. But I want to take a moment to point out that this gun just has done everything. It's been everywhere, and it's well vetted in just multiple conflicts. So there's nothing that I can say that can possibly kind of change any of that. But what we will talk about today is why you might want to buy one, and what it feels like to kind of handle one and use one, and some kind of pros and cons that come along with that. But just a phenomenal handgun overall, just straight up from the beginning. So when it comes to my information, first off, I did be the gun. It's not given to me or anything like that. In fact, the Browning High Power is one of the very first pistols that I ever bought. The very first pistol I ever bought was a SIG P226, and then the second gun I ever bought was the Browning High Power. And that's how much I love it. I just love the aesthetics of it. So I want to give credit where credit is due. A lot of my information came from the late Stephen A. Camp, who is a huge high power supporter. He passed away in about 2011, but more than anybody, he did so much when it comes to kind of fleshing out the high power and talking about its capabilities and that type of thing. He was a law enforcement officer, and I don't think enough can be said about his contribution to the high power world. So you can actually go to his site and buy his book. It now supports his widow. It's a great cause right there, so go in there and give him a little bit of support. So let's get into it, the Browning High Power. So first thing that you're going to notice about the Browning High Power is just, it's kind of small. When you first pick it up, you'll notice how small it is compared to modern handguns like, say, the Glock 17. And it's really not that much smaller, but what it is it's the lines. The lines of the Browning High Power are, for lack of a better term, elegant. They look good. It's kind of something that you're lacking in a lot of modern handguns, just kind of those flourishes and kind of those cosmetic finishes and design details that just make this gun very iconic. And the Glock, of course, is iconic in its own way, in the way that a brick is iconic. But you don't see quite that elegance in something like a Glock 17. This is a Gen 5 right here, versus the Browning High Power. Now, the Browning High Power was designed at a time when people were a little bit smaller. So because of that, you're going to notice the grip is a little bit smaller. Now, for a lot of people, that might not be good, like my battle gnomes and those types of guys. But if you have like medium-sized man hands, it fits pretty well. It's a little crowded. If you got small hands, it's going to be great. If you're looking at some large man hands, you might have to kind of figure out something. You might have to do one of those Hogue overmolded grips to kind of make that grip a little bigger. Otherwise, you're going to have some issues there. Now, let's go over some of the features on this particular gun. Now, there are a bunch of different models of the High Power. This gun has been made since 1935, so if you can imagine, there have been a lot of changes to it over that time. This particular model is a early Mark III, which is the latest model and the last model that was ever made. And this one does feature an ambidextrous safety. So if you're the type of guy who needs an ambidextrous safety, get in there and get it. For me, it's not that big of a deal. I could do without it. but it doesn't bother me and it works fine. You'll notice that this gun is a single action firearm. So because of that, you have a hammer. It's not striker fired. For some people, because there's so little tang right here on the back, you can get a little bit of hammer bite. I haven't had that problem personally, but I know that some people have had that issue. You can, of course, solve that with doing either a bobbed hammer or some type of spur hammer, and that fixes the issue. If you're one of those guys that are just getting crazy hammer bite, you might want to do that. Now, hammer bite, if you're not familiar, when you're firing the gun, it's going to recoil. Hammer's going to cock back. If you got a lot of meat right there in your hands, that hammer is going to press into the meat of your hand and kind of start gouging it a little bit. I'm kind of a skinny guy. Because of that, I don't have so much of the meat of my hand kind of coming up over the tang, so it works fine for me. So we have the safety hammer right there. Moving over to the slide stop. So on this particular gun, easy to actuate. There's a lot of talk about should use a slide stop or slingshotting it. Just use a slide stop. It works perfectly fine on it. Perfectly workable. When it comes to takedown, you have the safety right here, so you simply pull the gun back, then you engage on that notch, and you can simply push up on the slide stop, pull it out, hold the gun when you release the safety, and you can take the gun down. Pretty simple. When it comes to designs by John Moses Browning, it is a marked improvement over the 1911. Now, I do want to point out that while the gun was initially designed by John Browning, and it was finished by his protege, I'm going to butcher the name, but it is Dudiani Save. Now, I'm sure I butchered that, I'm sorry, but the guy also designed the FAL and multiple other firearms and is a very famous firearm designer in his own right. So a lot of credit must be given to both of them for designing this firearm. Now, moving down from the slide stop, let's talk a little bit about the grip. Now, one thing that I love about the Browning High Power is the grip angle, and I think this is probably one of the reasons that the High Power has had such staying power, is the fact that it just feels good and natural to shoot it in your hand. The grip just kind of gives it pointability. It just kind of goes onto target easily. And what that means is during rapid fire, your hand just kind of naturally goes back to the correct position. Now compare that to, say, the grip angle on a Glock 17, Glock 19, just a Glock. It's a little bit more aggressive, which is good for recoil control. However, I found that I need to work a little bit more on my follow-up shots to ensure that I'm bringing the weapon down, because the grip angle for me isn't as natural. I think for most people, the Browning High Power 1911, those types of guns, just feel more natural due to the more shallow grip angle. So that is something about the High Power that just feels good. Now when it comes to the grip, there's something to be desired. The standard wood grips that come on it, I'm not a huge fan of. I replaced them with Uncle Mike's rubber grips. There are also many other grips that you can get out there that are great. VZ makes some really good grips. I've used those for a long time, but I kind of love the rubberized grips. I know you guys are going to ask, and this is blasphemy, I know, but I have added rubberized tape to the front and the back of the grip right here. It just feels better in my hand. I know some people are going to get angry about that, but I wasn't about to have this gun, any work kind of done on this gun. I kind of wanted to keep it as stock as possible with tape on it. Kind of tacky, I know, but it just feels great. So don't judge my life. The magazine release is small, but easily actuated. With a lot of guns, you kind of have to shift your grip sometimes to hit the magazine release. On this gun, I haven't had those problems. That's been fine with me. Moving over to the trigger. That is kind of one of the unfortunate things on the Browning High Power. Due to patents and other things that were in place at the time, a different mechanism for the trigger had to be devised other than what was used in the 1911, and some other considerations. And again, I'm not forgotten weapons. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds here. But the kind of end result is that the trigger is lacking compared to what you think a trigger should be on a single action handgun. So I wish you guys could be here with me. We could ghost this. You'd put your finger on it, put my finger over it, and we'd kind of shoot it together. So you have to pretend you're here with me, but the take up on the gun is pretty, it's obviously longer than 1911. Feels a little bit shorter than a Glock. You hit the crisp wall, it lets off. The reset is kind of the problem here. So a reset, but if you notice, that reset isn't very tactile, nor is it audible. So there's a shot again. Let's see. There's a reset. So that is kind of one of my gripes with the High Power, is that the reset is not, you don't really feel it. Now, because of that, you need to train at the weapon a little bit more to ensure that you can do follow-on shots and that type of thing. Otherwise, you'll kind of end up slapping the trigger and that type of thing. Now, some people have said to me, you should always release your finger completely up and off the trigger. I disagree with that. Feel free to disagree back with me. It doesn't matter so much. But for me, the lack of kind of a good audible and tactile reset on the Browning High Power is a real kind of letdown on an otherwise really good handgun. All right, moving up from there, the sights on the Mark III are wholly adequate. You can, of course, change sights. On some of the earlier high powers, like the military surplus, the sights were very rudimentary and not so good. But nowadays, there are multiple options when it comes to iron sights, so pick ones that work for you. I'm just using the factory iron sights. Mine are a little bit worn, in fact, but multiple options when it comes to that. Question I get asked a lot is, why is it called the high power? Well, at the time, when this gun was designed in 1935, it used a 13-round magazine. That's a lot of the ammo for back then, so high power, high capacity, that type of thing. Nowadays, there are magazines that are 15, 17 rounders. I personally use the 15 rounders from Metgar. They work excellent. I have never had any trouble with them. They are very reliable, and they're pretty cheap, actually. So magazines, good to go on this particular gun. Now, if you guys notice, I was able to pull the trigger with no magazine in the gun. If you know the Browning High Power well, you know that another thing with the High Power is that it has a magazine disconnect. What that means is when there is no magazine in the gun, the trigger is not able to be pulled. That can, of course, be removed. There is some controversy on whether or not you should remove that. I'm not going to give you guys any legal advice, but I will say that the trigger pull is markedly improved when you remove the magazine disconnect. So a lot of people tend to do it. So whether or not you do that, completely up to you. It's not that difficult. But yes, I do have the magazine disconnect on this particular gun removed because the trigger pull is that much better, and I don't have the need for a magazine disconnect. It's not something that I need in my life. Now, when it comes to the Browning High Power, Stephen A. Camp did a lot of testing on it. And from this testing, it can be argued that the Browning High Power is just inherently a more accurate handgun than a lot of current service pistols out on the market. So I would argue that it is inherently more accurate than something like a Glock 17 or a Glock 19. That's just due to the design, fitment, and those types of things. I'm not going to get too deep into it because again, I'm not an engineer and I don't know, I'm just a shooter. But based on Stephen A. Camp's kind of methodology and testing, I would say that's pretty apparent. Now, of course, could he be biased? Sure. Could I be biased? Of course. But that's what I'm going to go with when we're talking about this particular review. Shooting. What does it feel like to shoot the Browning High Power? The Browning High Power is a very easily pointable, like I talked about earlier, and a very easily shootable weapon. It is a little bit heavy. So compared to an unloaded Glock 17, the Browning High Power is about 2.2 pounds unloaded, and the Glock 17, I had to look at my notes there, is 1.5 approximately unloaded. So the Browning High Power does weigh more than the Glock, but that being said, what that means is that when you're firing the gun, it does absorb that recoil very well. It's easy to keep on target. Now, of course, another problem with the Browning High Power is that there's no accessory rail. This was designed kind of before lights on guns kind of came in vogue. So because of that, attaching any type of weapon light to this gun is going to be difficult and problematic. Now, there are, of course, fixes and workarounds and those types of things, but as it stands coming from the factory, it's not doable. So that kind of brings us into cons. So there are definitely some cons to this gun, as you'd expect from a gun designed in 1935. It's been outpaced by a lot of guns. So let's talk about some cons. The biggest con for me is the magwell. So there is no magwell to speak of. What that means is when I'm loading a magazine, I really have to take a little bit of extra time to make sure it's lined up perfectly. You just have to train a little bit more to ensure that you can do a magazine reload as quick as you can with something like, say, a Glock 17 or a well-made 1911 with a magwell. So it's always been a problem. So running through like a course of fire on some type of competition, when you're doing those reloads, it might just be a little bit more time unless you practice like crazy on this particular handgun. Trigger reset is my biggest problem with the Browning High Power. I am not a big fan of the trigger reset. We talked about that earlier, but just wanted to mention it in the cons. Hammer bite, of course, for some people is a problem. That goes along with a lot of single action guns that don't have a large tang, but just let it be known as a con as well. Finally, the small grip can be a problem for my battle gnomes out there, and I know you're out there. The Browning High Power is a phenomenal pistol that has since been outclassed, but it is still a pleasure to shoot. It's expensive compared to a lot of handguns nowadays, but undeniably, it has aesthetics and beauty not really seen in modern handguns nowadays. I would really suggest adding one to your collection. I don't think you could go wrong with that. Enjoy shooting it. Is it the best, handgun for duty use and combat nowadays? Probably not. I think that the 19 and 17 have proven themselves extremely well in those roles. But that being said, this gun has been around the world and it's been in multiple conflicts and it's performed very well. So there's no doubt in my mind that if you get one of these, you're going to be happy. And undoubtedly, it makes you look cool. And what really makes you look cool, guys, is getting training. So make sure you get some training on handguns. There are multiple people out there who can train you. I'm going to recommend a couple to you. I'm going to recommend anybody from Haley Strategic, who does courses all around the country. I'm going to recommend Bear Solutions, Cogworks, and you can find those guys having courses just everywhere. So get in there, get some training, and look cool. Guys, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you watching. Cool little handgun, probably one of the coolest ones that I've reviewed to date. And as always, take care. Love you guys, and I've got nothing else for you. All right, I do have something else for you guys. Sometimes we're a little serious, and that's going to be one of those cases today. I've talked about suicide in the past, but today we're going to talk a little bit about depression. I'm sure everybody watching has knows somebody who suffered from depression, or maybe has suffered from depression themselves. So if you are suffering, or you know somebody who's suffering from depression, it's kind of hard to know what to do for that person. Like, how do you make them better? But I think what's important is to let them know that you're there for them, and that they mean something to you. And those are important things. And always take anything that they say seriously. If they are saying that they are thinking of taking their own life, please notify somebody. Please be there for them. Right now we have an epidemic in the military community with veterans committing suicide. We just had a friend who was lost not a week ago. So please be there for them. But let's do our best to support our community and support other people. And not even veterans or military, just being a human being and that type of thing. Just be decent and that type of stuff. I know it's tough, guys, but if you're suffering from it, reach out. You can reach out in these comments section, which is out of control as always, but I'll be there. You can hit me up on Instagram. I'm always happy to talk to you guys. I've talked to a lot of fans who've had trouble, and I'm there for you guys. Just want to let you know that. I might not know you, but we'll consider ourselves friends. How about? Guys, I appreciate you guys. Take care. I've got nothing else.